Hello, everyone, and happy Holy Week. Hope you're having a great day. Well, it's that week. It's that week in the year that the church is the busiest. It's that week in the year that's been celebrated since the beginning of Christian history. It's the most important week in all of the year. And so this is what's known as Holy Week. Now, not all Christian denominations celebrate Holy Week or talk about Holy Week, so you might be unfamiliar with it. And so I'm just going to give you a brief history of what this is, and maybe a coming attraction if you want to come to any of our services. Although every one of these days of Holy Week, you can study for years and years. There's so much richness to all of this. So this is just a glimpse of what it all means. Yesterday, we celebrated what is known as Palm Sunday. And in Palm Sunday, we remember the time when Jesus rode into Jerusalem. Now, what happened was he asked for his disciples to borrow a donkey to ride in on to this holy city of Jerusalem, where it was the home of the temple, the one Jewish temple. And it was thought to be the actual home of God, as if God really lived in just that one building. So Jesus was welcomed in with shouts of praise, and people put their leaves that they had cut down onto the ground to make a path for him. And so they were probably palm leaves, because palm trees are all over that area. And then they waved leaves also. So in our church yesterday, we had palm branches everywhere, and then people were also waving palm leaves. And the people welcomed him in with shouts of praise. They praised and shouted, "Hosanna to the King." They were so excited to see Jesus, and Jesus rode into Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem gave him a warm welcome, but Jerusalem was also going to be the place where he would eventually meet his earthly end. And so we move in our Palm Sunday service to talking about what's called the Passion. And the Passion of Christ means his suffering and his death. So we talked about that a little bit yesterday. And it was the same crowd that welcomed him in that also called for him to be crucified. And that's really, really sad. You know, his friends were not all that faithful at the time. And you know, to be truthful, we're like that. You know, as human beings, we can be pretty faithless sometimes too, and pretty fickle, and think one thing and then turn around and think another. So we're often faithful to God, and then we're not faithful to God. And so that's sort of the story of the human race. Well, the week moves into what is these sacred 3 days in the church. Now, these 3 days are celebrated at the end of the week and the beginning of next week. And those 3 days have been celebrated for thousands of years. So we start with what's called Maundy Thursday, or sometimes, like in the Catholic Church, it's called Holy Thursday. But on that day, we call it Maundy, and some other denominations call it Maundy Thursday, which comes from the Latin word mandatum, which means mandate or commandment. And the reason we call it that is because during this day, we remember a great commandment that Jesus gave to all people. So the day celebrates when Jesus celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples. So he sat down at this meal. He gave them bread and wine. He said, "This bread is my body, which will be broken for you. And this wine is my blood, which will be shed for you." He also knew that his betrayer was sitting right there at the table with him, but he gave him communion too. That was Judas. He gave him communion as well. That's called Holy Communion, or the Eucharist, that bread and wine. So that very night, he then washed their feet, and that was a symbolic act of being a servant to his disciples, of loving his disciples, and not lording it over them like he was a master, but more like he was serving them. He was loving them from below them as taking the form of a servant. And so then he told his disciples to go and do the same, to go and love. That's the mandate. That's the commandment, to love. So when that day is called Maundy Thursday, think of it as being called Commandment Thursday, and that's the commandment he gave right before he died. So then on that night, he was arrested, and we remember him being arrested. And so in our church, part of the service is that after I will anoint people's hands for service to go and love. I'll anoint them with oil, which is an ancient practice where I just put oil in the sign of a cross on people's hands and say you're now sent off to serve and love the world. Then we all share in communion. And then lastly, we have what's called the stripping of the altar, which means everything will be taken off of the altar and the pulpit, that whole area in front of the church. Everything will be taken off that's not nailed down. So that means any Bibles or prayer books, any candles, all of the elements of communion, the bread and wine and the plate and the cup that they hold communion, All of the cloths that are on the altar and the pulpit, those are called paraments, they will be taken down. Any banners that are hanging, they will be taken away. And it's symbolic, as the congregation sits there and watches everything being taken away, it's symbolic of all being lost. Just everything being sad, stripped away, broken. It's a very down, sad time. And then everybody leaves in silence. It's almost like we're stepping back into sacred time and we're reenacting through our rituals. We're reenacting that sacred story that happened so long ago where all seemed lost. Then we come back on the next day, and that's called Good Friday. Now, it's not good because it's happy. It's good because of what actually ended up happening that day. So Good Friday is where we remember how Jesus was killed, not just arrested, but now we're remembering how he was crucified, how he died on the cross. That's not good. In fact, we sing songs that are rather sad and a bit painful. And we sing those songs as we also hear again the passion, meaning the whole story of how Jesus was arrested, crucified, his last words, and then his death. So that doesn't feel very good, but it's good because of what this means for us. That because Christ died on the cross, sacrificing himself for us, he loved us, even if it meant death. There's nothing he wouldn't do for creation and all of humanity because he loved us so much. And that also was a sacrifice that healed any kind of brokenness, any kind of sin, any kind of sense of separation between the people and God. It was all healed. All sin was atoned for. Everything was put back together, if you will. That's what is good. So again, it's a somber time. It's again reliving that time ritually, stepping into the sacred story and the sacred time and reliving that time, because we will get the most out of Easter if we do that. There's a saying that says the stars are the brightest against the darkest sky. So at this point, this is where we pause and we go, wow, the sky's pretty dark. I mean, we look at sin, we look at death, we look at torture and murder of our God, and that he could have gotten out of that. There are things he could have said, the things he could have done, and he didn't, because he was willing to go through even death if that meant that he would be closer to us and that he would heal us. It's what he was willing to do out of great love. And so then we don't meet during Saturday, and Saturday's a time to just watch and wait. It's what the people did after they took his body down off of the cross and wrapped him in a shroud and put his body in a tomb. They needed to wait for the Sabbath to be over to then go and anoint his body with perfumed oils, which is what they did to prepare a body for eternal, for rest in a tomb. So Saturday is just sort of a day where the world is on pause. And then Sunday morning, that's when we celebrate the resurrection of God. That Jesus, God is Jesus, that Jesus didn't stay dead. Now, it's not that he didn't die. He did. He didn't just pretend to die or circumvent death somehow. It's that he died fully, bearing fully the weight of all that meant, the sin, the suffering, all of it. And yet there was new life, new birth, new hope from that place of death. So women went to the tomb. They were the last ones to stay at the cross as he was dying, but then they had to wait until they could then go back to the tomb after the Sabbath was over. And they saw the stone that was blocking the entrance to the tomb. It was rolled away, and they had no idea what was going on. And then eventually they saw the resurrected Christ. And at first didn't recognize him, but then they did, and they were so excited, like, how can this be? It was miraculous. And then Jesus told the women to go and tell the disciples what they had seen. And so these women were the first ones to preach the gospel, the good news of the resurrected Christ. So when we come to church on Easter, we again step into that sacred time, and ritual always reenacts sacred time. And so we're remembering that first Easter. And so when we come in, we'll see the black cloths that we had draped over everything. The black cloths will be taken down. There will be Easter lilies. It's tremendous morning with all this beautiful uplifting music, new life. Not only new life for God, but that means new life for us, because everything that we've done that's been making a mistake or sin, that's been atoned for. So we don't have to atone for it. Our past is now done. It is done, and God does not look back. So now we are free to move into our future too, into our new resurrected life together with God, the God who is always bringing new life into our lives and into all of creation's lives. God is a God of life. God is a God of new starts, new beginnings. So I invite you to think deeply about this whole week and what all of this huge drama, this huge story, what it all means, what it meant about God, what is God willing to do, and then what does it mean for you and for me and for all people that sin and death has been taken care of, and that we're now moving into new life where we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be afraid of sin. We don't have to be afraid of death. We don't have to be afraid of separation or brokenness or think we'll never heal from something or that our past has to define us. Hey, all those shackles have been thrown off. That's what Easter is all about. Thank you for listening to all of this. I know it's a lot of history in a little short period of time. And again, you can study all of this for a lifetime. It is so rich, it is so meaningful, and it will mean something to you every year you go through this. Please subscribe to these videos if they are helpful. Feel free to share them with friends. And I invite you to anything that Cross and Crown ever does. You can go ahead and look up our church, Google it online, Cross and Crown Lutheran Church in Rancho Cucamonga. But if you're celebrating somewhere else too, the whole world is walking through this week together. In countries all over the world, billions of Christians are realizing what this means. So wherever you are, I wish you a blessed Holy Week, a blessed Easter, and may you always know how very much God loves you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.